What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ. Today's video is going to be week 2 of the Ray Williams Classic Prep, and then also I'm going to talk about a topic that's really unrelated to that, and that is if it's worth it to join a powerlifting gym. And also know that I'm coming from the position of someone who's trained at a commercial gym for 8 to 10 years, then I've trained at a bodybuilding gym, then trained at a powerlifting gym. I just now recently switched over. So I think I can kind of relate to someone who's just looking into this. So first of all, I think that the extreme ends of the bell curve are the types of people who should be looking into this the most. Because if you're an extreme beginner, you just started, then you're gonna get the most benefit out of just talking to people and being in a community of experienced lifters. So guys could have a 400 Wilks and still help you out just because they're informed, and if they've been in the sport a few years, they're gonna know more than someone who might be a lot stronger. There's a lot of those guys locally that you really shouldn't underestimate. And of course, they'll help you out for free initially and maybe multiple times, but at some point it's on you to probably offer some type of payment if they keep helping you out, or cut that off eventually. Just make sure as a beginner you don't abuse nice people, because people in the powerlifting community tend to be like that. They tend to be helpful. There's no reason to be intimidated if you are. And even if you are intimidated and you think that maybe powerlifters aren't that nice, you just have to think about from a business perspective that it'd be incredibly stupid to have a gym and then only cater to the top 3 people in your state to be as elite as possible, and then you go out of business in a few months. So they need the average person, and you could walk into Dan Green's gym right now and he's going to treat you with respect. So next, moving on, is the advanced level lifters, in my opinion, should go to a powerlifting gym for a totally different reason, because at that point it's about efficiency. So first it's about safety, and then it's about efficiency at the extreme tail end. Eventually you reach a point where every centimeter counts, and I'm sure a lot of people here especially have heard about the difference with deadlift bars and with thicker plates, how the flex just reduces the range of motion. That's the basic stuff, but then it even affects the squat in terms of your tempo speed can be a little bit quicker with pound plates, get a little bit more of a bounce, especially if you're using a whippy or a bar too. And then also certain things like if you're a sumo puller, for example, the start of the knurling can even be sooner on a 24/7 fitness bar, and that can allow for someone like myself, for example, to have a more vertical arm grip. And that was enough where I had to accept a little bit of a downgrade. It affected me at least 15 to 30 pounds. And of course on the bench, that's the only lift where I'd say converting to a powerlifting gym actually will increase the lift, because having a wider bench obviously is helpful. But then also it's just a lot easier to unrack, to get tight. There's a lot more notches. And I find that it's a far more conducive setup to having a wider grip bench. So if you just write off wide grip bench and you train in a commercial gym and you just say, it never felt right, well, that just might be a thing where the environment's limiting you more than your actual abilities. So there just reaches a point where this is going to make a bigger difference, in my opinion, than possibly any informative YouTube video you watch at all. Where if you are trying to figure out how to cue in your lats and how to pull the slack of the bar out of a 24/7 gym fitness bar with pound plates, at that point you might just have to ask yourself, is this really gonna take me to the next level, or do I just need to actually make the commitment to go to a different gym, to drive 15 extra minutes, to pay $10 extra a month? So to get back to the general population, the middle group of that bell curve, in my opinion, does not necessarily need a powerlifting gym. Obviously, if you're focusing on the sport, it will always benefit you to just get as specific as possible. But I think the best test is to say, does your conventional increase as your sumo increases? When your sumo increases, does your conventional also increase? When your back squat increases, does your front squat? Does your high bar squat? If all of those things tend to move together, then honestly, you probably don't need to focus on the minutia, because then your general strength gains are exceeding any degree of efficiency, planning, periodization, where you have to really pick your battles. Once you have to pick your battles, that's when it becomes apparent that you're going to have to prioritize efficiency. Then you see that black already? That's what's like lifting in a Texas warehouse gym. Already got my new belt ready. Day 1. When I say advanced level lifters, by the way, I mean how close you are relative to your genetic potential, how slow your progress is, I always go by that definition because you can be very efficient while squatting just 500 pounds. And of course, someone else could be extremely inefficient while squatting 700 pounds. And they might say, it doesn't really matter since I can add 5 to 10 pounds anyways. You shouldn't even overthink it. That's their opinion. But then once you have those plateaus that maybe last 6 months, now you know that every little detail matters for you specifically. And of course, that's relevant to your programming, because if your program's hyper-specific, then you getting thrown out of position from a random whip of the bar, well, that's now going to be a bigger factor. Whereas if you're someone who has a strong good morning, strong front squat, and strong back squat, well, at that point, now you could get thrown out of position, and it's not that big of a deal. The bar path becomes more important the more specific you're training, and the more specific your training likely is correlated to how long you've been training. That's just the usual progression. So I will honestly say, if you train West Side, you probably don't need to focus on this as much if you really do just build everything all at once, and you can do that for the long term. Okay, so now I want to remove myself from that beginner, intermediate, advanced breakdown and just say a few things generally. And one is that if you have a max stance width and a vertical arm grip on sumo deadlift, in my opinion, you should be in a powerlifting gym no matter what. So actually I had a client ask me about this, if it's worth it for him, and he pulls around 550. But his other lifts are not as strong as his deadlift. That's his specialty. So for him, I said easily that you should, because at that point, there are too many factors in terms of balance. There's too many factors in terms of the percentage of range of motion is different relative to the slack being pulled out because your lift is so short. For example, in the 181 class, Dmitry Nasnov has a world record that is statistically a far outlier. And in my opinion, the primary reason for that is because of how thick the plates are, and he has a deadlift bar, and he has a max stance width. So he gets so much whip that there was a Reddit post a long time ago where it showed that 33% of the total range of motion the bar moved was literally in the slack of the bar. So it's almost impossible to emphasize enough just how big of a factor that can be. Whereas if you pull conventional, even pulling 880, he's not going to be able to get that percentage of whip. Maybe you could get somewhat close to the whip, obviously if you have a fairly narrow grip relative to conventional, but the percentage of range of motion is still drastically different. So that is a really big factor. And then also the fact that the grip strength itself is going to be so bar dependent on that style sumo with the friction at the top that, in my opinion, you just need that direct practice. Otherwise, it will throw everything off. No matter how advanced you are, if you squat with a very slow descent, let's say a slow controlled low bar, you also bench with a very narrow grip, and then on deadlift, you just pull conventional. At that point, it probably isn't that big of a deal no matter what. That's just my opinion. I think all those versions of those lifts are the least technical, and in that squat, you're not going to get a big bounce out of the hole, so you're not going to see a bigger difference like an Olympic squat would. So there are always those exceptions, and it's important to keep in mind for yourself, if you're that exception, that maybe it's not worth the extra 20-minute drive. And then lastly, in terms of personality, something that you have to keep in mind is if you are introverted and if you're going to be in a community that is talkative, that does things as a team. So personally for myself, I prefer to train alone. I prefer to have nobody recording me. I prefer to not really talk about it in the moment. I can talk about it after the moment just fine, for hours one-on-one. But when I go to the gym, I don't want a brick wall of conversation. I've had days where I'm benching 5 days a week. So when I go in, I'm just going in to get it done, got my headphones on, and then someone's waving hi, wanting me to take the headphones off. Please don't do that. So obviously that's no big deal, but it's just something to keep in mind. I think I actually like the personality of a bodybuilding gym because there it does seem a little bit more locked in, and then you just put your headphones on, you do your own thing. But I'm sure there are other powerlifting gyms where it's totally that atmosphere too. So I would just visit at least one day before you commit, just to make sure it's not that big of a deal. And if it is a 24/7 gym, to then just come when not that many people are there. That's my strategy personally. So that's it, guys. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest factors in modern powerlifting taking off. I think, of course, the biggest factor is always population interested in the sport. That's how you're going to get those genetic outliers relative to society. But I do think that just access to kilo plates, access to bars, knowledge about the bars, that's something that, practically did not exist in 2014, 2015. There would be times where my deadlift was straight up limited just by a super smooth knurling on a bar. And it was so much the norm that I didn't even realize it until I did a few meets. So I think that this is something to seriously consider if you are at that level where you've heard all the tips and it kind of seems redundant, but at the same time, you look around and you realize you're not in the competition setting. So there is room to improve. There is room to take that extra step. So that's it, guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching, guys. Peace.